Why are coal, oil, and natural gas called fossil fuels?
Coal, oil, and natural gas are composed of the remains of organisms that lived as long ago as 500 million years. These microscopic organisms, such as phytoplankton, became incorporated into the bottom sediments and then were converted, with time, to oil and gas. Coal is the remains of plants and trees, changing into peat and then lignite, that were buried and subjected to pressure, temperature, and chemical processes for millions of years. Fossil fuels are non-renewable sources of energy. There is a finite supply of the resources for fossil fuels. Eventually these resources will diminish to the point of being too expensive or too environmentally damaging to retrieve. Fossil fuels provide more than 85% of all the energy consumed in the United States, including 2/3 of the electricity and nearly all of the transportation fuels.
How do chlorofluorocarbons affect Earth's ozone layer?
Chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, are hydrocarbons, such as freon, in which part or all of the hydrogen atoms have been replaced by fluorine atoms. These can be liquids or gases, are non-flammable and heat-stable, and are used as refrigerants, aerosol propellants, and solvents. When released into the air, they slowly rise into Earth's upper atmosphere, where they are broken apart by ultraviolet rays from the sun. Some of the resultant molecular fragments react with the ozone in the atmosphere, reducing the amount of ozone. The CFC molecules' chlorine atoms act as catalysts in a complex set of reactions that convert 2 molecules of ozone into 3 molecules of ordinary oxygen. This is depleting the beneficial ozone layer faster than it can be recharged by natural processes. The resultant hole lets through more ultraviolet light to Earth's surface and creates health problems for humans, such as cataracts and skin cancer, and disturbs delicate ecosystems, for example, making plants produce fewer seeds. In 1978 the US government banned the use of fluorocarbon aerosols, and currently aerosol propellants have been changed from fluorocarbons to hydrocarbons, such as butane.
What are the 2 divisions of the respiratory system?
The respiratory system is divided into the upper respiratory system and the lower respiratory system. The upper respiratory system includes the nose, nasal cavity, and sinuses. The lower respiratory system includes the larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli.
What is carbon black?
Carbon black is finely divided carbon produced by incomplete combustion of methane or other hydrocarbon gases. By letting the flame impinge on a cool surface. This forms a very fine pigment containing up to 95% carbon, which gives a very intense black color that is widely used in paints, inks, and protective coatings, and as a colorant for paper and plastics. It is also used in large amounts by the tire industry in the production of vulcanized rubber.
What is the current population and status of the great whales?
The 20th century, with its many technological improvements, was the most destructive period for the cetacea. In 1972, the U.S. Congress passed the Marine Mammal Protection Act. One of its goals was to reduce the number of small cetaceans, notably Stenella and Delphinus, killed and injured during commercial fishing operations, such as the incidental catch of dolphins in tuna purse seines. Nets that close up to form a huge ball to be hoisted aboard a ship. Dolphins are often found swimming with schools of yellowfin tuna and are caught along with the tuna by fishermen who use purse seine nets. The dolphins are drowned by this fishing method because they must be able to breathe air to survive. The Earth Island Institute established 5 standards in order for tuna to be considered dolphin safe. They are: no intentional chasing, netting, or encirclement of dolphins during an entire tuna fishing trip. No use of drift gill nets to catch tuna. No accidental killing or serious injury to any dolphins during net sets. No mixing of dolphin safe and dolphin deadly tuna in individual boat wells, for accidental kill of dolphins, or in processing or storage facilities. Each trip in the Eastern Tropical Pacific Ocean, ETP, by vessels 400 gross tons and above must have an independent observer on board attesting to the compliance with points 1 through 4, above. More than 90% of the world's tuna companies adhere to these standards.
When was the first geothermal power plant built?
The first geothermal power station was built in 1904 in Larderello, Italy, by Prince Piero Conti. The prince attached a generator to a natural steam-driven engine to produce enough power to illuminate 5 light bulbs. In 1913 the first geothermal power plant with a capacity of 250 kilowatts was installed.
When will Niagara Falls disappear?
The water dropping over Niagara Falls digs great plunge pools at the base, undermining the shale cliff and causing the hard limestone cap to cave in. Niagara has eaten itself 7 miles, 11 kilometers, upstream since it formed 10,000 years ago. At this rate, it will disappear into Lake Erie in 22,800 years. The Niagara River connects Lake Erie with Lake Ontario. and marks the U.S. Canada boundary, New York, Ontario.
How many kinds of volcanoes are there?
Volcanoes are usually cone-shaped hills or mountains built around a vent, connecting to reservoirs of molten rock, or magma, below Earth's surface.
What was the cause of the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster?
The Columbia Space Shuttle was launched on January 16, 2003 on mission STS-107. The mission was a research mission, and the crew had many science experiments ranging from plant growth to a cancer drug study to studying the effects of microgravity on the cardiovascular system. The Columbia Space Shuttle was lost during its re-entry to Earth's atmosphere on February 1, 2003. The investigation of the disaster determined that a piece of foam insulation broke off shortly after liftoff and damaged the thermal protection system on the leading edge of the orbiter's left wing. As the Space Shuttle descended, superhot gases entered the interior aluminum structure of the orbiter. The internal wing structure was weakened, and eventually the atmospheric forces tore off the wing. The final communication between Columbia and NASA flight controllers occurred at an altitude of approximately 203,000 feet, 61,900 meters, over Texas. Debris from Columbia was later found in Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana.
Which breed is known as the wrinkled dog?
The Shar-Pei, or Chinese fighting dog, is covered with folds of loose skin. It stands 18 to 20 inches, 46 to 51 centimeters, tall and weighs up to 50 pounds, 22.5 kilograms. Its solid-colored coat can be black, red, fawn, or cream. The dog originated in Tibet or the northern provinces of China some 2,000 years ago. The People's Republic of China put such a high tax on Shar-Peis, however, that few people could afford to keep them, and the dog was in danger of extinction. But a few specimens were smuggled out of China, and the breed has made a comeback in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Although bred as a fighting dog, the Shar-Pei is generally an amiable companion.
Which bird migrates the greatest distance?
The Arctic tern, Sterna paradisea, migrates the longest distance of any bird. They breed from subarctic regions to the very limits of land in the Arctic of North America and Eurasia. At the end of the northern summer, the Arctic tern leaves the north on a migration of more than 11,000 miles. 17,699 kilometers, to its southern home in Antarctica. A turn tagged in July on the Arctic coast of Russia was recovered the next May near Fremantle. Australia, a record 14,000 miles, 22,526 kilometers, away.
What does the expression tiling the plane mean?
It is a mathematical expression describing the process of forming a mosaic pattern. A tessellation, by fitting together an infinite number of polygons so that they cover an entire plane. Tessellations are the familiar patterns that can be seen in designs for quilts, floor coverings, and bathroom tile work.
How far away is the nearest black hole?
The black hole nearest to Earth is V4641 Sagittarii. It is 1,600 light-years. 9,399,362, 677,500,000 miles, away from Earth.
Which American states allow medical marijuana usage?
Since 1996, 15 states and the District of Columbia have passed laws allowing the use of marijuana for medical purposes. These include Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Maine, Michigan, Montana, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. Depending on the state, patients may possess between 1 ounce, Alaska, Montana, Nevada, to 24 ounces, Oregon, Washington, of usable marijuana and grow their own plants. States also vary on which diseases are approved for treatment using marijuana.
When did the first computer virus spread via the Internet?
The first known case of large-scale damage caused by a computer virus spread via the Internet was in 1988. Robert Morris, Jr. 1965, a graduate student at Cornell University, crafted a worm virus that infected thousands of computers, shutting down many of them and causing millions of dollars of damage.
What is El Niño?
El Niño is the unusual warming of the surface waters of large parts of the tropical Pacific Ocean. Occurring around Christmas time, it is named after the Christ child. El Niño occurs erratically every 3 to 7 years. It brings heavy rains and flooding to Peru, Ecuador, and Southern California, and a milder winter with less snow to the northeastern United States. Studies reveal that El Niño is not an isolated occurrence. but is instead part of a pattern of change in the global circulation of the oceans and atmosphere. The 1982 to 1983 El Niño was one of the most severe climate events of the 20th century in both its geographical extent as well as in the degree of warming, 14 degrees Fahrenheit or 8 degrees Celsius.
What is the economic importance of roots?
Carrots, beets, turnips, radishes, horseradish, sugar beets, and sweet potatoes are all taproots that have been used as food for human consumption for centuries. The spices licorice, sassafras, and sarsaparilla. The flavoring used to make root beer, are derived from roots. The drugs aconite, gentian, ipecac, ginseng, reserpine, a tranquilizer, and protoveratrine, a heart relaxant, are all extracted from the roots of plants.
What material is used to make a tuning fork?
A tuning fork, an instrument that when struck emits a fixed pitch, is generally made of steel. Some tuning forks are made of aluminum, magnesium alloy, fused quartz, or other elastic materials.
What are Koch's postulates?
Robert Koch was the first to identify that various microorganisms are the cause of disease. His four basic criteria of bacteriology, known as Koch's postulates, are still considered fundamental principles of bacteriology. The characteristics are as follows: 1. The organism must be found in tissues of animals that have been infected with the disease, rather than in disease-free animals. 2. The organism must be isolated from the diseased animal and grown in a pure culture or in vitro. 3. The cultured organism must be able to be transferred to a healthy animal, which will show signs of the disease after having been exposed to the organism. 4. The organism must be able to be isolated from the infected animal. Koch was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1905 for his research on tuberculosis.
What are the advantages of solar power?
Solar energy is a clean, abundant, and safe energy source. More energy falls from the sun on Earth in 1 hour than is used by everyone in the world in 1 year. Over a 2-week period, Earth gets as much energy from the sun as is stored in all known reserves of coal, oil, and natural gas. Solar energy can be used to heat water and spaces for homes and businesses or can be converted into electricity. Solar energy accounts for only about 1% of the total renewable energy resources.
Which gland is the largest?
The liver is the largest gland and the second largest organ after the skin. At 2.5 to 3.3 pounds, 1.1 to 1.5 kilograms. The liver is 7 times larger than it needs to be to perform its estimated 500 functions. It is the main chemical factory of the body. A duct gland that produces bile to break down fats and reduce acidity in the digestive process. The liver is also a part of the circulatory system. It cleans poisons from the blood and regulates blood composition.
From where do comets originate?
According to a theory developed by Dutch astronomer Jan Oort, 1900 to 1992. There is a large cloud, now called the Oort cloud, of gas, dust, and comets orbiting beyond Pluto out to perhaps 100,000 astronomical units, (O). Occasional stars passing close to this cloud disturb some of the comets from their orbits. Some fall inwards toward the sun. Comets, sometimes called dirty snowballs, are made up mostly of ice, with some dust mixed in. When a comet moves closer to the sun, the dust and ice of the core or nucleus heats up, producing a tail of material that trails along behind it. The tail is pushed out by the solar wind and almost always points away from the sun. Most comets have highly elliptical orbits that carry them around the sun and then fling them back out to the outer reaches of the solar system, never to return. Occasionally, however, a close passage by a comet near one of the planets can alter a comet's orbit, making it stay in the middle or inner solar system. Such a comet is called a short-period comet because it passes close to the Sun at regular intervals. The most famous short-period comet is Comet Halley, which reaches perihelion, the point in its orbit that is closest to the Sun, about every 76 years. Comet Inc., with an orbital period of 3.3 years, is another short-period comet.
How large is the Antarctic ozone hole?
The term hole is widely used in popular media when reporting on ozone. However, the concept is more correctly described as a low concentration of ozone that occurs in August-October, springtime in the southern hemisphere. It was not observed until 1979. The first scientific article on ozone depletion in the Antarctic was published in Nature in 1985. The largest ozone hole ever observed, 11.4 million square miles. 29.6 million square kilometers, occurred on September 24, 2006. The daily maximum ozone hole area for 2009 was 9.3 million square miles, 24 million square kilometers.
How many types of sensory receptors have been identified?
Five types of sensory receptors, each responding to a different type of stimulus, have been identified.
What is the bearing capacity of ice on a lake?
The following chart indicates the maximum safe load. It applies only to clear lake ice that has not been heavily traveled. For early winter slush ice, ice thickness should be doubled for safety.
Which country is the largest supplier of oil to the United States?
Canada is the largest supplier of crude oil to the United States. In 2008, the United States imported 912,263,000 barrels of oil from Canada. The next largest single country supplier of crude oil to the United States was Saudi Arabia with 559,750,000 barrels of crude oil.
What is a miner's canary?
Miner's canary refers to the birds used by miners to test the purity of the air in the mines. At least 3 birds were taken by exploring parties, and the distress of any one bird was taken as an indication of carbon monoxide danger. Some miners used mice rather than birds. This method of safety was used prior to the more sophisticated equipment used today.
How many gallons are in a barrel of oil?
The barrel, a common measure of crude oil, contains 42 U.S. gallons or 34.97 imperial gallons.
Why does the moon always keep the same face toward Earth?
Only one side of the moon is seen because it always rotates in exactly the same length of time that it takes to revolve about Earth. This combination of motions, called captured rotation, means that it always keeps the same side toward Earth.
What is the Piri-Reis map?
In 1929 a map was found in Constantinople that caused great excitement. Painted on parchment and dated in the Muslim year 919, 1541 according to the Christian calendar. It was signed by an admiral of the Turkish Navy known as Piri Reis. This map appears to be one of the earliest maps of America, and it shows South America and Africa in their correct relative longitudes. The mapmaker also indicated that he had used a map drawn by Christopher Columbus. 1451 to 1506, for the western part. It was an exciting statement because for several centuries geographers had been trying to find a lost map of Columbus supposedly drawn by him in the West Indies.
Which U.S. astronauts spent time aboard Mir.
The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 allowed the United States and Russia to enter a new era of space collaboration. NASA made a financial commitment of $400 million to the Russian space program to continue the expeditions to the Mir space station. The Space Shuttle Atlantis was fitted with a special adapter to allow it to dock with Mir. There were 11 Space Shuttle flights to Mir between February 1994 and June 1998. In a new spirit of cooperation, Russian cosmonauts began to fly on the shuttle, while American astronauts began to spend time on Mir conducting experiments with their Russian counterparts. The experiences gained by the U.S. astronauts on Mir were beneficial in planning for the International Space Station. A total of 7 U.S. astronauts spent 980 cumulative days aboard Mir.
What is the deadliest natural toxin?
Botulinal toxin, produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum, is the most potent poison of humans. It has an estimated lethal dose in the bloodstream of 10 to 9 mg per kilogram. It causes botulism, a severe neuroparalytic disease that travels to the junctions of skeletal muscles and nerves, where it blocks the release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, causing muscle weakness and paralysis, and impairing vision, speech, and swallowing. Death occurs when the respiratory muscles are paralyzed. This usually occurs during the first week of illness. Mortality from botulism is about 25%. Because the bacterium can form the toxin only in the absence of oxygen. Canned goods and meat products wrapped in airtight casings are potential sources of botulism. The toxin is more likely to grow in low-acid foods, such as mushrooms, peas, corn, or beans, rather than high-acid foods like tomatoes. However, some new tomato hybrids are not acidic enough to prevent the bacteria from forming the toxin. Foods being canned must be heated to a temperature high enough and for a long enough time to kill the bacteria present. Suspect food includes any canned or jarred food product with a swollen lid or can. Ironically, this dreaded toxin in tiny doses is being used to treat disorders that bring on involuntary muscle contractions, twisting, etc. The United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, has approved the toxin for the treatment of strabismus, misalignment of the eyes, blepharospasm, forcible closure of eyelids, and hemifacial spasm, muscular contraction on one side of the face.
How long can an orange tree produce oranges?
An average orange tree will produce fruit for 50 years, but 80 years of productivity is not uncommon. And a few trees are known to be still producing fruit after more than a century. An orange tree may attain a height of 20 feet, 6.1 meters. But some trees are as much as 30 feet, 9.1 meters, high. Orange trees grow well in a variety of soils but prefer subtropical settings.
What are the four major groups of plants?
They are, non-vascular, seedless vascular, flowering, seed-bearing vascular, and non-flowering, seed-bearing vascular. Plants are divided into phyla based on whether they are vascular, containing vascular tissue consisting of cells joined into tubes that transport water and nutrients, or non-vascular. The phyla of vascular plants are then further divided into seedless plants and those that contain seeds. Plants with seeds are divided into flowering and non-flowering groups. Non-vascular plants have traditionally been called bryophytes. Because bryophytes lack a system for conducting water and nutrients, they are restricted in size and live in moist areas close to the ground. Examples of bryophytes are mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. Examples of seedless, vascular plants are ferns, horsetails, and club mosses. The conifers, which are cone-bearing, are seed-bearing, non-flowering vascular plants. The majority of plants are seed-bearing, flowering, vascular plants known as angiosperms.
What are the leading causes of stress?
In 1967, when they conducted a study of the correlation between significant life events and the onset of illness, Dr. Thomas H. Holmes, 1918 to 1989, and Dr. Richard H. Raw, 1936. From the University of Washington compiled a chart of the major causes of stress with assigned point values. They published their findings on stress effects as the Social Readjustment Scale. Printed in the Journal of Psychosomatic Research. The researchers calculated that a score of 150 points indicated a 50/50th chance of the respondent developing an illness or a health change. A score of 300 would increase the risk to 90%. This type of rating scale continues to be used to help individuals determine their composite stress level within the last year. Since 1967, other researchers have adapted and modified the checklist. But the basic checklist has remained constant. Of course, many factors enter into an individual's response to a particular event. So this scale, partially represented below, can only be used as a guide.
What is kudzu?
Kudzu, pure Aria lobata, is a vine that was brought from Japan for the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. It was intentionally planted throughout the southern United States during the 1930s in an attempt to control erosion. In fact, the federal government paid farmers as much as $8 an acre to plant it. In 1997, however, the government reversed its position on kudzu and referred to it as a noxious weed. Kudzu grows over everything that it encounters, draping itself across power poles and pine trees like a shawl. The plant is responsible for more than $50 million in lost farm and timber production each year. It grows at a rate of 120,000 acres per year. As of the early 21st century, it covers between 2 and 4 million acres of land throughout the United States, occurring from Connecticut in the east to Missouri and Oklahoma in the west, and south to Florida and Texas. Kudzu grows as fast as 1 foot, 30 centimeters, per day. The latest approach to controlling the growth of kudzu is to have goats chew on it, devouring the leaves, stems, and roots.
What is the speed of light?
Light travels at 186,282 miles, 299,792 kilometers per second, or 12 million miles per minute.
Which elements are the noble metals?
The noble metals are gold, O, element 79, silver, Ag, element 47, mercury, Hg, element 80. And the platinum group, which includes platinum, Pt, element 78, palladium, Pd, element 46, iridium, Ir, element 77, rhodium, Rh, element 45, ruthenium, Ru, element 44, and osmium, Os, element 76. The term refers to those metals highly resistant to chemical reaction or oxidation, resistant to corrosion, and is contrasted to base metals, which are not so resistant. The term has its origins in ancient alchemy, whose goals of transformation and perfection were pursued through the different properties of metals and chemicals. The term is not synonymous with precious metals, although a metal, like platinum, may be both. The platinum group metals have a variety of uses. In the United States, more than 95% of all platinum group metals are used for industrial purposes. While platinum is a coveted material for jewelry making, it is also used in the catalytic converters of automobiles to control exhaust emissions, as are rhodium and palladium. Rhodium can also be alloyed with platinum and palladium for use in furnace windings. Thermocouple elements, and in aircraft spark plug electrodes. Osmium is used in the manufacture of pharmaceuticals and in alloys for instrument pivots and long-life phonograph needles.
Of what magnitude was the earthquake that hit San Francisco on April 18, 1906?
The historic 1906 San Francisco earthquake took a mighty toll on the city and surrounding area. Over 700 people were killed. The newly constructed $6 million City Hall was ruined. The Sonoma Wine Company collapsed, destroying 15 million gallons, 57 million liters, of wine. The quake registered 8.3 on the Richter scale and lasted 75 seconds total. Many poorly constructed buildings built on landfills were flattened. And the quake destroyed almost all of the gas and water mains. Fires broke out shortly after the quake, and when they were finally eliminated, 3,000 acres of the city, the equivalent of 520 blocks, were charred. Damage was estimated to be $500 million, and many insurance agencies went bankrupt after paying out the claims. Another large earthquake hit San Francisco on October 17, 1989. It measured 7.1 on the Richter scale. Killed 67 people, and caused billions of dollars worth of damage.
What are the phases of the Moon?
The phases of the Moon are changes in the Moon's appearance during the month, which are caused by the Moon's turning different portions of its illuminated hemisphere toward Earth. When the Moon is between Earth and the Sun, its daylight side is turned away from Earth, so it is not seen. This is called the new Moon. As the Moon continues its revolution around Earth, more and more of its surface becomes visible. This is called the waxing crescent phase. About a week after the new Moon, half the Moon is visible, the first quarter phase. During the next week, more than half of the Moon is seen. This is called the waxing gibbous phase. Finally, about 2 weeks after the new Moon, the Moon and Sun are on opposite sides of Earth. The side of the Moon facing the Sun is also facing Earth, and all the Moon's illuminated side is seen as a full moon. In the next 2 weeks the Moon goes through the same phases, but in reverse, from a waning gibbous to third or last quarter to waning crescent phase. Gradually, less and less of the Moon is visible until a new Moon occurs again.
What is the process known as hydrocarbon cracking?
Cracking is a process that uses heat to decompose complex substances. Hydrocarbon cracking is the decomposition by heat, with or without catalysts, of petroleum or heavy petroleum fractions, groupings, to give materials of lower boiling points. Thermal cracking, developed by William Burton, 1865 to 1954, in 1913. Uses heat and pressure to break some of the large heavy hydrocarbon molecules into smaller gasoline-grade ones. The cracked hydrocarbons are then sent to a flash chamber where the various fractions are separated. Thermal cracking not only doubles the gasoline yield, but has improved gasoline quality. Producing gasoline components with good anti-knock characteristics, no premature fuel ignition.
Why does the risk of cancer diminish rapidly after one quits the cigarette smoking habit?
Exposure of a premalignant cell to a promoter converts the cell to an irreversibly malignant state. Promotion is a slow process, and exposure to the promoter must be sustained for a certain period of time. This requirement explains why the risk of cancer diminishes rapidly after one quits smoking. Both cancer initiators and promoters appear to be contained in tobacco smoke.
Who discovered cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR? As a method to resuscitate an individual whose heart had stopped?
Cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, is a first aid technique that combines mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and rhythmic compression of the chest to a person whose heart has stopped. The Scottish surgeon William Tosach, c. 1700 after 1771, first performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in 1732. The technique was not further developed, or widely used, for many centuries until Dr. Edward Schaefer, 1850 to 1935, developed a method of chest pressure to stimulate respiration. In 1910 the American Red Cross adopted and began to teach Schaefer's method. A team of specialists at Johns Hopkins Medical School, Orth Lor Langworthy, 1897 to 1996. R. D. Hooker, and William B. Cowenhoven, 1886 to 1975, attempted to improve on the technique. Cowenhoven realized that chest compression could maintain blood flow in a person whose heart had stopped. In 1958 Cowenhoven's method of chest compression was used on a 2-year-old child whose heart had stopped. The American Red Cross endorsed the technique in 1963.
When does menarche typically begin?
Menarche, from the Greek, meaning beginning the monthly, is the first menses, or menstrual cycle, of a girl's life. It usually begins between the ages of 11 and 12.
Who invented bifocal lenses?
The original bifocal lens was invented in 1784 by Benjamin Franklin, 1706–1790. At that time, the two lenses were joined in a metallic frame. In 1899, J. L. Borch welded the two lenses together. One-part bifocal lenses were developed in 1910 by researchers at the Carl Zeiss Company.
Who invented the COBOL computer language?
COBOL, Common Business-Oriented Language, is a prominent computer language designed specifically for commercial uses. Created in 1960 by a team drawn from several computer makers and the Pentagon. The best-known individual associated with COBOL was then Lieutenant Grace Murray Hopper, who made fundamental contributions to the U.S. Navy's standardization of COBOL. COBOL excels at the most common kinds of data processing for business, simple arithmetic operations performed on huge files of data. The language endures because its syntax is very much like English and because a program written in COBOL for one kind of computer can run on many others without alteration.
How have genetics been linked to the Salem witch trials held in 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts?
It is believed that some of the early English colonists that settled in New England may have had Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is an autosomal dominant disorder characterized by late-onset symptoms, age 40 to 50, such as mild behavioral and neurological changes. As the disease progresses, psychiatric problems develop that frequently lead to insanity. Early descriptions of the odd behavior included names such as that disorder and St. Vitus's dance to describe involuntary muscle jerks and twitches. Many of the witches who were on trial for possession may have had Huntington's disease, which causes uncontrollable movements and odd behavior. However, if the protein product is not known, the task is more difficult. An example of this would be that of finding the susceptibility gene for late-onset Alzheimer's disease. DNA samples would be collected from family members of a patient with late-onset Alzheimer's disease. The DNA would be cut with restriction endonucleases and restriction fragment length polymorphisms, RFLPs, would be compared among the family. If certain RFLPs are only found when the disease gene is present, then it is assumed that the distinctive fragments are markers for the gene. Geneticists then sequence the DNA in the same area of the chromosome where the marker was found, looking for potential gene candidates.
What is the composition of the tiles on the underside of the Space Shuttle and how hot do they get?
The 20,000 tiles are composed of a low-density, high-purity silica fiber insulator hardened by ceramic bonding. Bonded to a Nomex fiber felt pad, each tile is directly bonded to the shuttle exterior. The maximum surface temperature can reach up to 922 K to 978 K, 649 degrees Celsius to 704 degrees Celsius or 1200 degrees Fahrenheit to 1300 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which elements are contained in Earth's crust?
The most abundant elements in Earth's crust are listed in the table below. In addition, nickel, copper, lead, zinc, tin, and silver account for less than 0.02%, with all other elements comprising 0.48%.
Does the use of plastic products present a health risk?
The chemical bisphenol A, also called BPA, has been used to make lightweight hard plastics and epoxy resins since the 1960s. BPA may be found in many food and beverage packaging, including baby bottles, infant feeding cups, water bottles, plastic dinnerware, toys, and other products. The epoxy resins are used in the inside lining of metal food cans, bottle tops, floorings, paints, and water supply pipes. In general, plastic products made with BPA will have a number 7 recycling symbol on them or contain the letters PC near the recycling symbol. Although many studies have shown BPA to be safe, some recent studies have reported subtle effects of low doses of BPA in laboratory animals. It has not been proven that BPA is harmful to adults or children, but certain precautions have been recommended while research continues. These precautions include not using scratched baby bottles and infant feeding cups and not using BPA containers to heat food.
What is the status of the African elephant?
From 1979 to 1989, Africa lost half of its elephants from poaching and illegal ivory trade, with the population decreasing from an estimated 1.3 million to 600,000. This led to the transfer of the African elephant from threatened to endangered status in October 1989 by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES. An ivory ban took effect on January 18, 1990. Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe have agreed to restrict the sale of ivory to a single, government-controlled center in each country. All countries have further pledged to allow independent monitoring of the sale, packing, and shipping processes to ensure compliance with all conditions.
Did Charles Darwin have any nicknames?
Darwin had several nicknames. As a young naturalist on board the HMS Beagle, he was called Philos because of his intellectual pursuits and flycatcher when his shipmates tired of him filling the ship with his collections. Later in his life, when he became a leader in the scientific community, journalists referred to him as the Sage of Down or the Saint of Science. But his friend Thomas Henry Huxley privately called him the Tsar of Down and the Pope of Science. His own favorite nickname was Stultus the Fool. And he often signed letters to scientific friends with Stultus. This name referred to his habit of trying experiments most people would prejudge to be fruitless or fool's experiments.
What is high technology or high tech?
This buzz term used mainly by the lay media, as opposed to scientific, medical, or technological media, appeared in the late 1970s. It was initially used to identify the newest, hottest application of technology to fields such as medical research, genetics, automation, communication systems, and computers. It usually implied a distinction between technology to meet the information needs of society and traditional heavy industry, which met more material needs. By the mid-1980s, the term had become a catch-all applying primarily to the use of electronics, especially computers, to accomplish everyday tasks.
Is Pluto a planet?
When Pluto was first discovered in 1930 by American astronomer Clyde Tombaugh, 1906 to 1997, it was considered the ninth planet of our solar system. During the late 1990s and the beginning of the 21st century, astronomers began to discover more objects orbiting beyond Neptune in the area known as the trans-Neptunian region. On the night of October 21, 2003, Mike Brown from Caltech, Chad Trujillo from the Gemini Observatory, and David Rabinovitz from Yale University discovered a new object more massive than Pluto with its own satellite. The International Astronomical Union, IAU, began to debate the question of what constitutes a planet. In 2006, the IAU approved a new definition of a planet. This definition states that a planet is an object in orbit around the Sun, an object with sufficient mass, large enough to have its self-gravity pull itself into around or near spherical shape, has cleared the neighborhood around its orbit of other objects. Pluto no longer meets the definition of a planet because of its size, and it is in the trans-Neptunian region, a zone of other similarly sized objects. Instead, Pluto is a dwarf planet.
What groups of organisms have prokaryotic cells and which ones have eukaryotic cells?
All living organisms are grouped into three large groups called domains. They are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. The domains bacteria, eubacteria or true bacteria, and archaea. Archaebacteria or ancient bacteria consist of unicellular organisms with prokaryotic cells. The domain eukarya consists of 4 kingdoms: Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. Organisms in these groups have eukaryotic cells. Eukaryon means true nucleus.
Is the large intestine essential for life?
Since the role of the large intestine is mainly as a storage site for fecal material and the elimination of it from the body, it is not essential for life. Individuals who suffer from colon cancer or other diseases will often have their colon removed. The end of the ileum is brought to the abdominal wall. Food residues are eliminated directly from the ileum into a sac attached to the abdominal wall on the outside of the body. Alternatively, the ileum may be connected directly to the anal canal.
What was the first computer game?
Despite the fact that computers were not invented for playing games, the idea that they could be used for games did not take long to emerge. Alan Turing proposed a famous game called Imitation Game in 1950. In 1952, Rand Air Defense Lab in Santa Monica created the first military simulation games. In 1953, Arthur Samuel, 1901 to 1990, created a checkers program on the new IBM 701. From these beginnings, computer games have today become a multi-billion-dollar industry.
What distinguishes the different types of microscopes?
Microscopes have played a central role in the development of cell biology, allowing scientists to observe cells and cell structures that are not visible to the human eye. The 2 basic types of microscopes are light microscopes and electron microscopes. The major differences between light and electron microscopes are the source of illumination and the construction of the lenses. Light microscopes utilize visible light as the source of illumination and a series of glass lenses. Electron microscopes utilize a beam of electrons emitted by a heated tungsten filament as the source of illumination. The lens system consists of a series of electromagnets. Recent advances using optical techniques have led to the development of specialized light microscopes, including fluorescence microscopy, phase contrast microscopy, and differential interference contrast microscopy. In fluorescence microscopy, a fluorescent dye is introduced to specific molecules. Both phase contrast microscopy and differential interference contrast microscopy utilize techniques that enhance and amplify slight changes in the phase of transmitted light as it passes through a structure that has a different refractive index than the surrounding medium.
What are carnivorous plants?
Carnivorous plants are plants that attract, catch, and digest animal prey, absorbing the bodily juices of prey for the nutrient content. There are more than 400 species of carnivorous plants. The species are classified according to the nature of their trapping mechanism. All carnivorous plants have traps made of modified leaves with various incentives or attract ants, such as nectar or an enticing color, that can lure prey. Active traps display rapid motion in their capture of prey. The Venus flytrap, Dionaea muscipula, and the bladderwort, Utricularia vulgaris, have active traps that imprison victims. Each leaf is a two-sided trap with trigger hairs on each side. When the trigger hairs are touched, the trap shuts tightly around the prey. Semi-active traps employ a two-stage trap in which the prey is caught in the trap's adhesive fluid. As prey struggles in the fluid, the plant is triggered to slowly tighten its grip. The sundew, Drosera capensis, and butterwort, Pinguicula vulgaris, have semi-active traps. Passive traps entice insects using nectar. The passive trap leaf has evolved into a shape resembling a vase or pitcher. Once lured to the leaf, the prey falls into a reservoir of accumulated rainwater and drowns. An example of the passive trap is the pitcher plant, Sarracenia purpurea. The Green Swamp Nature Preserve in southeastern North Carolina has the most numerous types of carnivorous plants.
What is the significance of On the Origin of Species?
Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, first proposed a theory of evolution based on natural selection in his treatise On the Origin of Species. The publication of On the Origin of Species ushered in a new era in our thinking about the nature of man. The intellectual revolution it caused and the impact it had on man's concept of himself and the world were considered by many to be greater than those caused by the works of Isaac Newton, 1642 to 1727, and other individuals. The effect was immediate. The first edition sold out on the day of publication, November 24, 1859. Origin has been referred to as the book that shook the world. Every modern discussion of man's future, the population explosion, the struggle for existence, the purpose of man and the universe, and man's place in nature rests on Darwin. The work was a product of his analyses and interpretations of his findings from his voyages on the HMS Beagle. In Darwin's day, the prevailing explanation for organic diversity was the story of creation in the book of Genesis in the Bible. Origin was the first publication to present scientifically sound, well-organized evidence for the theory of evolution. Darwin's theory was based on natural selection in which the best or fittest individuals survive more often than those who are less fit. If there is a difference in the genetic endowment among these individuals that correlates with fitness, the species will change over time and will eventually resemble more closely, as a group, the fittest individuals. It is a two-step process. The first consists of the production of variation, and the second of the sorting of this variability by natural selection, in which the favorable variations tend to be preserved.
Which disease is the most common?
The most common non-contagious disease is periodontal disease, such as gingivitis or inflammation of the gums. Few people in their lifetime can avoid the effects of tooth decay. The most common contagious disease in the world is coryza, or the common cold. There are nearly 62 million cases of the common cold in the United States annually.
What is antimatter?
Antimatter is the exact opposite of normal matter. Antimatter was predicted in a series of equations derived by Paul Dirac, 1902 to 1984. He was attempting to combine the theory of relativity with equations governing the behavior of electrons. In order to make his equations work, he had to predict the existence of a particle that would be similar to the electron, but opposite in charge. This particle, discovered in 1932, was the antimatter equivalent of the electron and called the positron, electrons with a positive charge. Other antimatter particles would not be discovered until 1955, when particle accelerators were finally able to confirm the existence of the antineutron and antiproton, protons with a negative charge. Antiatoms, pairings of positrons and antiprotons, are other examples of antimatter.
How is the age of a dog or cat computed in human years?
When a cat is 1 year old, it is about 20 years old in human years. Each additional year is multiplied by 4. Another source counts the age of a cat slightly differently. At age 1, a cat's age equals 16 human years. At age 2, a cat's age is 24 human years. Each additional year is multiplied by 4. When a dog is 1 year old, it is about 15 years old in human years. At age 2 it is about 24, after age 2, each additional year is multiplied by 4.